Welcome into the show post NBA Draft 2023 CT with EJ, Mark Berman to recap what went down, what's to come. Appreciate everyone for joining in conversation. How are we feeling, gentlemen? Mark, good to see you. EJ.
Thanks for having me again, CT. Great to see you, EJ. I know today was a big day for you with a nice big summer off and just to focus on relaxation. But it's going to be very busy for the Knicks.
Good to be back on. It's been a minute since I've been buzzing. As Mark alluded to, my daytime survived. So shout out to all of the scholars, young academics, all of the students who've been working really hard this entire school year. Good congratulations to all the graduates, and I'm so glad to be buzzing and glad to be here with my friend, the one and only, the legendary Mark Berman. Good to see you, CT. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm okay, but ready for more what's to come. After last night was kind of anticlimax. What do you make of, Mark? The Knicks not making any pick. The way I look at it was like they weren't really working anyone out in the first round, and maybe they're trying to save some salary for a free agency run.
Yeah, well, the workouts, when you don't have a pick, it's difficult to convince some agents to get your player into the building. But talking to someone from the organization a week ago involved in the draft process, he sounded very confident that after 60, there'd be some decent players who fell out of the draft. And two guys they signed, obviously, to the two-way contracts. One of them obviously shocking. But I thought if they had a big offer for Obi, maybe they would do it. But I will have to say, I think they want to save Obi for a blockbuster, unless the conspiracy theory that they signed Jacob Toppin means there could be a Julius Randle trade in the works, and the Knicks would build around an Obi rotation, and that would spell to me, or that would put Thibodeau on some thin ice.
That's interesting. It seems as if, from the time we've started really working together, the Knicks have been very deliberate under the Leon Rose administration in terms of their moves. They're not one of these. It's not the Isaiah Thomas era where you would have a deal every couple of days or every couple of weeks, or even the Donnie Walsh era, where especially when Donnie had that missive, we're going to try to get as much cap relief as possible to make an earnest effort at getting LeBron in 2010. This administration, Leon Rose administration, seems to do things very, very deliberately. It's one move, it's one signing, or two signings. It's one move before the deadline, the trade deadline, in February. So I'm not surprised that, and this is also an organization, if you think about it, when we've had picks that routinely moves back, we've yet to really see them move up to try to get that big fish in the draft. And so tie that in together with the idea of there are some major cap implications for the next couple of moves that they make. This time last year, we were talking about some of these players that we've fallen in love with or we've had issues with, whether it be an RJ or Julius Randle. I think we're at that point now where important decisions are being made or have been made in terms of folding two contracts or folding three contracts into one possible larger contract. So am I surprised that they didn't purchase their way into the draft? No, because I think this is the summer, particularly coming off of the success that they had this particular year, where certain players will be moved. Now, who they are, no idea.
We may have just lost Mark for a minute. He'll jump back in. But yeah, EJ, as the chat continues to give their thoughts about the Knicks not even dipping into the second round. Mark, you're back.
Yeah, I lost you guys for a moment.
Yeah, I was just saying, even dipping into the second round, it's easy to buy a pick, so it was pretty intentional that the Knicks didn't really dip into that. We know you've told us, Mark, Tom Thibodeau is not the biggest fan of the process and things like that, and roster spots are very scarce. So they've got their two-way spots filled, but what's to come with the main roster? We got Josh Hart. They've got to re-sign. Do you still feel like an Obi Toppin move now that they've signed his brother is still more imminent? Or could you see them bringing Obi into the season and just running it to his final year?
No, I think Obi is a goner. Again, unless they feel there's something with Julius Randle that they could package to bring back something very special. Julius and Obi cannot coexist anymore. Obi obviously blew his top after Game 4 when he was benched in Miami, and they had obviously a verbal altercation with the coach. Obi's been amazing with the media for 3 years. He always says whatever the coach thinks. He's always said the right things. He's never even showed a hint of frustration. So he has really bit his tongue with the media, but he just could not take it anymore when he got benched in Miami. He wants to play legitimate minutes. He cannot if Julius Randle is on the roster. When they drafted Obi, it looked like Julius was going to be traded at some point. And then Julius had an all-NBA season. And if they could do it over again, they would have drafted Halliburton, I'm sure. But I think Obi goes in a blockbuster, or maybe it's even a more minor deal. But one of the frustrating parts for Knicks fans last night, not having a first-round pick, as well as Josh Hart did perform, and he except against Miami, they gave up a first-rounder for him. And who knew that the Dallas Mavericks would be smart enough to tank the final 2 games, keep their pick, and they had a great night. They had a great draft night, moving back, getting an asset, picking again, and later in the round. They added some nice pieces, which was better than a stupid play-in tournament where they surely would have been eliminated very early.
I have a question for you, Mark. With regards to the Obi situation, I know that Knicks Twitter sphere and Knicks content creators, they were rushing to discuss the contents of this leaked audio. Here's the question I have. Do we even know why the audio was leaked? I mean, that's the surprising thing to me. Like it's almost as if, why would someone be recording this? With Obi seems like such a media darling. Would it behoove Obi's camp to even be involved in some sort of recording like this?
I don't think it was Obi's camp. I think it was an incidental recording by, say, an MSG network camera that was in the hallway. So I wasn't in Miami. I mean, I was in South Florida, but not in the arena that night. And Peter Body witnessed Obi ticked off in the locker room, outside the locker room. In a loud voice, he was saying things, but they had no idea what it was about. So there were some media members around, not any of the mainstream media, but it occurred where there may have been a microphone or two. So I don't know about that conspiracy that Obi's camp leaked it. The key is it started with Bondi earlier in the week saying that Obi could be on the move. So there was someone wanted it out there. Now, the CAA wanted it out there to get teams in line to make bids, possibly. Did the Knicks want it out there because they were possibly going to make a trade that fans would not understand, not realizing the circumstances, that Thibodeau and Obi had a major falling out that probably is irreparable? I mean, that's another theory. But listen, for 3 years, I've probably hinted or written that, Thibodeau does not consider Obi a top-notch player, does not trust him on defense. He makes little mistakes that we probably don't understand or don't see on the court. And if he's not hitting his three-point shot, Tom doesn't have a lot of use for him, especially when Randle is rolling.
Yeah, you've told us also, Mark, EJ, that last deadline, the reason Obi wasn't dealt, or one of the main reasons, was a guy, supporter in the front office, Worldwide Wesley, tried to make sure the price tag on Obi was too high. so that teams would back off. I mean, I can assume maybe they were requesting two first round picks for him or something along those lines. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's what I heard before, at the deadline or after the deadline when he wasn't traded, that the price tag was too high. And yeah, Wesley loves Obi. It's all the CAA conspiracy. Uh, the Jacob Toppin thing still is stunning, and we'll probably talk about it. But yeah, Wesley is a very big fan of Obi and not a big fan of Tom Thibodeau, and that's not breaking news at all.
I guess we should probably go here then for a second. The CAA, I mean, if we had been talking about CAA, and there's been CAA conversation throughout Knicks Twitter sphere for a while now, but it became really palpable and really tangible this past week. Here's a question. In your experience, in your tenure as a writer, is it often that you have this kind of influence and control by an agency like a CAA and a Klutch, or is this more of a new phenomenon where it seems as if, from my unexperienced eyes, where agencies seem to often have more influence and power than the players, and this has been noted as a players' league. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, never before has an agent. Like, listen, there's been a couple of agents, Bob Myers at Golden State, but he worked for that Wasserman group, I guess, but it was a non-factor. Leon Rose, comes from CAA and seems to make it a priority to do everything either Kentucky-oriented or CAA-oriented. And it's bothered a lot of people in the league, not just Rich Paul from Klutch. I mean, listen, Rich and Leon have a personal beef. It goes back to 2010. Rich essentially stole LeBron from Leon. Rich was a friend of LeBron's from the Cleveland Akron area, and Leon was LeBron's agent. So, it's a long-standing rivalry there. But the rest of the league also is concerned that Leon, as Bondi, reported, favors, CAA players and definitely tries to bring them into the Knicks. And Jacob Toppin was the prime example. I mean, another undrafted guy. I can't even believe they gave him a two-way contract instead of like, all right, invite him, sign him to the summer league team, and then maybe even giving him in that Exhibit 10 where you get a little guarantee and then see how he does in summer league. But, he was one of maybe the fifth best player in Kentucky. So on a Kentucky team that didn't do very well. So the CAA influence, Sam Rose is Leon's son, and Sam, is a secondary agent for the Toppins. So it's mind-boggling, and it hasn't happened. There's been other agents. David Kahn. I'm just shocked that it's gotten to this point where it seems like Leon is looking out more for CAA than the Knicks at sometimes.
Yeah, I think something got to give, and I've been saying this stat, gentlemen, and this point won't surprise you, but 5 out of the 9 Knicks rotation players were CAA represented from the playoffs. That's more than 50% of the rotation with one agency. Remains to see what happens with Josh Hart. We'll talk about that in a second. But after the Cam Reddish debacle, Nerlens Noel, maybe the fact that Tom Thibodeau is at the helm, the coaching helm, was one of the reasons why, Klutch is apprehensive. But Tom Thibodeau coached Zach LaVine himself. So, Mark, what was sort of Tibbs' experience with Zach LaVine personally? Would he have welcomed Zach LaVine back, from what you've heard?
It's funny. It was probably 2 years ago. LaVine had an amazing game against the Knicks, and we asked LaVine about Tom, and he was complimentary. But I don't know if I don't think he loves Tom, but I don't. This whole notion that the camp for LaVine doesn't want to go to the Knicks, it's more Rich Paul. I mean, I think, Zach would come to New York because it is a great place to play basketball, to be on the Knicks, not Brooklyn. But, I think they got along well enough. Obviously, he was involved in a trade with Tom as the coach, but I would be surprised if Zach had a real problem with Tom's coaching. He's still one of the best coaches in the NBA, even though he has a lot of dissenters on Twitter who rebel against his rotations and his decision not to give Obi a lot of minutes. But it's a very odd story. Oh, and it's a story that only happens to the Knicks.
No, you're right. I mean, it's frustrating because it's the scenario, it's the story where we feel good for a couple of months or a couple of weeks, and then something Knicksian happens where it's like only in Knicks world do you have the assets to procure an all-star talent, an all NBA talent, and instead of us discussing like the tangibles or like the different things the different variables that go into a deal, we're discussing agencies like that and representation being the factor that might mitigate a Zach LaVine trade. And I'm not necessarily sold on Zach LaVine as being part of a trade, but the fact that we have to discuss Klutch and CAA instead of discussing if Zach LaVine fits on the roster, it's Knicksian, and that's unfortunate, especially after such a good season. This is the point where we should really be discussing how can we procure that next level talent and who needs to go and who needs to stay. And some people in the chat are making the Khris Smith comparison from about 6 or 7 or maybe at this point 10 years ago with J.R. Smith. But yeah, it's unfortunate, and I think that it's a distraction that, in terms of fixing the Knicks' reputation across the league, that's the other part of this that's kind of disheartening, is because it wasn't that long ago we were here and we were talking about how the perception of the Knicks in the league was being rebranded. This idea that the Knicks were becoming a sexier location, and once again we have a story that tarnishes it, and that's frustrating.
Yeah. Mark, I've got to ask you a couple two-part question. Scott Perry has his tenure has ended. There's no official general manager now. Can we assume it's Gerson Rosas or a mixture of people, or what are your thoughts on that? And then looking ahead now, with the CAA tree, I've been focused on the players that are CAA repped. They are in discussions with Paul George. Kyle Kuzma is a free agent now. Karl Anthony Towns, we haven't heard anything from Minnesota. So what's next?
Yeah, Scott Perry was always on borrowed time, even though he got that extension after that first season. The Knicks did very well. Obviously had a really great season. He got an extension, which was a little surprising, but he was never a Leon Rose guy. And yes, Rosas, even though he hasn't officially been announced as a quote consultant, he's been a major decision maker and was, obviously we all know this, he was engineering the trade talks with Utah last summer with Donovan Mitchell. Tom knows Rosas from Houston. They work together. Tom likes him. At the summer league,
Right.
Not the summer league, the pre-draft camp in 22, I saw Tom and Rosas sitting together for like 4 hours. So yeah, Rosas is really he's got Leon's ear, he's got Tom's ear. Hopefully they'll finally announce him as the general manager. But he's been general manager for a while now. Scott had lost all of his power. He stopped traveling with the team. He was essentially a college scout. And even in the war room, I remember the Quickly draft. Scott did not have Quickly in the first round. Scott had Quickly in the 30s, but he was overruled by William Wesley and even the former assistant coach Kenny Payne, who lobbied for Quickly. So yes, Scott didn't have a lot of power. He was a GM in name only. The other part of the question was
what's next in free agency? There's talk with the Clippers, with Paul George. I'm looking at the CAA clients. There's some on screen: Kuzma, Cat. I don't think Zion. We haven't heard anything of that situation. But with LaVine, not possibility this season. Like, do you think could you see real legs to this Paul George discussion.
Yeah, well, nothing was going to happen on draft night. It was very preliminary, but I mean, he is a Tom type of player because he's a very good defender, but he's not a Tom type of player because he's hurt a lot. And there's a load management issue with him. So is he a great fit if he's not available? He wasn't even healthy for the playoffs. But I think I know Tom wants to make a big move. He knows what this roster is about. A lot of people around Tom feel that the reason why they made the second round and had an excellent regular season record was because of Tom. Because Tom got the most out of a roster that it's not very talented. So, yeah, Paul George brings a lot of talent, and you cross your fingers that he'll stay healthy, just like the Clippers have had to cross their fingers about Kawhi Leonard. I would never touch Kawhi. I think he's done. But, Paul, I think, has some mileage left. And I think it would be a great deal if you're not giving up anyone from the core. I wouldn't give up Julius. Julius is available. I mean, unfortunately, he had, he played every single game, and then late in the season, he broke down and was never fully 100%, obviously needed surgery after the playoffs. But I like the idea of Paul George because I think the Knicks have to take a little bit of a risk. And to second round doesn't do anything anymore. I mean, this is going to be a 51-year title drought. They got to go for they haven't had a first-round pick selection in the last 2 years. This is not a rebuilding team in any stretch of the imagination. So, I mean, they talk about all the picks they have in the future. This is that's to trade. So let's make a move. I mean, the Knicks got to make a move this summer. I know Steve Popper wrote, stand pat, let the Josh Hart have a full season. Are you kidding me? Josh Hart, come on.
Wow, EJ.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I mean,
no, I mean we've
and
seen your passion.
But
we've seen it come out in the tweets
on my text messages too. So.
This is going to be cut and replayed and aggregated, right? I guess this is my question, and this is for both of you guys really quickly, is, we're in the throes of, Knicks and NBA soap opera season where everyone, has all these stories, these fantastical trade machines, displays, and the like. CT and Mark, which do you think is more likely? Zach LaVine on the Knicks or Paul George on the Knicks?
CT?
Yeah, I got to say it's Paul George based on what we're hearing. I think he's more of a Tibbs guy, like Mark said. I think it comes down to, and I was saying this last night in the watch along, it comes down to what does the Clippers want. If Steve Ballmer is breaking up Kawhi and PG, he's going to need something to sell the fans on. Is quickly Toppin, Fournier salary filler, and heaps of picks enough? And Mark said he doesn't see Julius in the deal. Would RJ then be in the deal? And there was a second report, gentlemen, that the Knicks moved away or were hesitant in continuing discussions with the Clippers. Let's see if that continues. But yeah, for me, it's PG, Mark. Yeah,
the LA Times actually followed up and said that the Knicks were most concerned that Paul George is going to want a contract extension. He's due now, so he could opt out in 24. So he's under contract for another year, but that means you can now extend this summer his contract. And I think they're a little leery that he wants it. He wants to extend the contract. So yeah, a long-term deal with Paul George is not the greatest thing because of his injury history. But Paul George for 2 seasons, would be wonderful. And, that's the window maybe. But LaVine is a healthier player, not a defender, but he's a great offensive player. I'll tell you, he's had some games against the Knicks where I'm like, wow. I mean, this guy is great. And I know Lonzo Ball is now out for next season.
Yeah.
mean, they have a hole at the point guard. I think you can make a deal with LaVine. Listen, Rich Paul could say anything he wants that he doesn't want his guys with the Knicks, and I know that. I know he said for over a year, and I tweeted it, that he prefers not to have any of his clients play for the Knicks. He thinks it's not a great situation there anymore. But the Bulls have to do what's best for the Bulls. And if the Knicks can put together a lot of picks and some young players like Quickly and Obi, maybe they can offer the best deal.
Yeah.
What's your response to that, EJ?
That's you guys are having the debate that I've been having myself, is that PG, you can rationalize it and say that the contract makes sense because you're not committed to it long term. But then, as the reports have been suggesting, you come back to the injury history. You come back to the idea that this is a Tom Thibodeau run team, that Tom Thibodeau expects for his players to be available. And historically, PG has not been available. And then you go back to the idea of, do you actually want an older player for this particular roster? There are some pros to that. There's some cons to that. And so that then brings us to Zach LaVine. He seems to fit the timeline more, and the organizational structure around him, particularly with the Bulls, seems to be more amenable to blowing up that team than the LA Clippers. The Clippers could concede, they could argue with themselves and convince themselves, we have more of a reason to bring back Kawhi and PG. We have a new arena that's opening up. It makes more sense for us to keep it together. And if you're then going to try to pry PG away from the Clippers, it might come at a higher cost. Whereas with the Chicago Bulls, there might be more of a reason for them to decide, this is it. The window has closed on this team. If James Harden stays with Philadelphia, there's some other teams that have improved. We don't see a foreseeable path with this roster construction for us to get past the first round, if that. So I do think that, they're both players where you have question marks, but I would probably lean more towards Zach just because of age. Not if contracts notwithstanding, but probably with Zach because he'll probably be more available.
Yeah, he was on the lips of many fans before last night, and probably will continue. But Mark, it's been amazing to have you on and hear your thoughts on this. Anything else you would want to get out there? I know you've got a lot of pent up energy.
I'm sorry, say that again.
You've got a lot of pent up energy. Anything else you want to get out there?
Yeah, I know. It's like when you're not writing a lot. At the New York Post, you're writing like 1,500 words a day. So, yeah. But I've still kept active. I'm doing a couple of, website and the Palm Beach Post out here. But yeah, to follow the team more from afar, it's just fascinating. And you really get an appreciation on the fans. When you're in the middle of it, in the trenches, you kind of like, the fans can be annoying to you because they're attacking you and here and there. But when you're a little bit at a distance, you just look at it and say, wow, these fans are amazing. I mean, they just love this team and have so much passion. And I've really appreciated more now that I'm away than when I was in the middle of it.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you chiming in and how passionate, how much you want to see the Knicks be good now. It's been, like you said, going on 51 years. But I want to leave you with one last thing. We revisit last offseason with Donovan Mitchell. The fact is, the noise hasn't gone away from what I'm hearing, Mark. Is Leon Rose potentially keeping a seat warm for still a Donovan Mitchell when he has more control over his fate?
I mean, if you saw Donovan Mitchell's face on the bench in that final game with the club about to be eliminated, I mean, he just did not look like a happy guy at all. He looked miserable. And to have the Knicks humiliate his team at the Garden, you just got to wonder if Donovan at some point, he wanted the Knicks. He didn't want Cleveland. No matter what he said at the first press conference or whatever, he wanted the Knicks and admitted that he thought it was a done deal. So, yeah, listen, if this season if Cleveland crashes and burns like they crashed and burned this past spring, I would not be surprised if we're going through another Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes, and finally maybe the Knicks will step up and hit the home run. But Donovan's isn't getting any younger, and he was a little disappointing in the final few games of that series, but he would have been. Fans keep saying, "Oh, I'm glad they didn't get Donovan because Jalen would not have been Jalen," but I disagree. I think they would have been a great pairing. And RJ is still RJ. He's great one night, terrible the next night, and it's too erratic. If you're going to win a championship, you need better than RJ, in my opinion, because he's just too much of an erratic player. And plus, he still makes silly decisions. Someone told me recently that he's great in practice. He's a smart player in practice, does all the right things, and then in the game, like it doesn't translate into the game.
Yeah, well, we wait to watch. We see what happens with Paul George or what they do with the cap space. But yeah, it's amazing being talking and recapping this. Mark, we'll continue with EJ the conversation, and be well, and chat to you soon.
Guys, thanks so much. I really enjoyed it, and keep the show going. Thanks for the invitation, and we'll see what happens this July.
Yeah. Keep
Take care,
tweeting.
buddy.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Berman. Great to get his thoughts on this situation. EJ, did you follow along last night?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even I low key was there watching on the watch along last night with you guys, and it was an interesting night because usually, at least for me, the last few seasons, I go into the draft and I'm like very excited. I have my popcorn and some snacks for the draft, but usually it starts to kind of become clear when the Knicks aren't going to make a move. So my excitement level dropped probably midway through the first round, where I kind of concluded that the Knicks weren't going to be making a move, that they were going to be standing pat, with the resolve that it's probably an indication that their plan wasn't to make a significant impact on the draft or to have a major draft pick come out of this, because they're probably looking at the trade market and trying to figure out how do they procure that person that they want to get, or if they're going to roll over and make minimal improvements around the edges and really wait for 24-25, which God help us if we're waiting another season to really talk about Knicks viability in the championship conversation.
Yeah, I get how fans just want us to be in contention straight away. But for me, there's something to be said for being better every year. Just we were better than the year before. This season, I'm okay if we're just better than we were last year, because that's going to mean Eastern Conference Finals. And then if we're better the following year, it could mean NBA Finals. We've seen how long Denver had to wait. It's not just easy there's 29 teams are getting better. But yeah, we're in New York City, so I understand, the fan base. We have a couple of super chats we'll also address. Appreciate everyone rocking along. CT with EJ. We spoke with Mark Berman after the NBA draft recap. 007 Angelo. Appreciate you. Nope. Not a Nixie and Klutch LeBron have much power over the NBA now. Silver is a weakling excuse of a commish. NBA needs like a Stern type. And on that note, what are your thoughts on the Ja Morant suspension also on this comment? 25 games. It was built up to be something more. Did you feel?
Yeah, it was a weird situation. The Ja Morant situation. First, I haven't really said much about this for a long time. It just wasn't for a league that really, if you know the history of the NBA, particularly the late 1970s into the early 1980s, the NBA that we have today, the fact that it is what it is, a global game, is nothing short of a miracle. The late 1970s, players they were getting drug arrests. There were players that were, cocaine was running rampant. The NBA finals were on tape delay. So for the league to be what it is today, sometimes we have to remember context and historical context, especially. It's one that David Stern, who I actually, in a weird way, I didn't even share the story with you. I had the pleasure of meeting one day. And one of the things
Wow.
he always talked about, I totally forgot about it. Go
Just
figure.
randomly or at an event?
At an event, and I had a chance to talk to him about a paper that I was writing about the evolution of the NBA. And one of the things that he said was that it was really largely about finding personalities that you could market. And the league for the past 40 plus years has been about personalities that transcend the sport and can sell Coca-Cola, that can sell Sprite, that can sell sneakers, that can sell, you name the product, but it's about getting marketable stars. My issue with Ja Morant is you have to understand that that's the business model of the NBA. The lineage of Michael, Larry, Magic, Shaq, Kobe, even AI, when we remember the controversies that swirled around AI, it was because of, is this an image that's sellable? And as a result, the NBA even started to make changes around the periphery, whether it was the dress code, whether it was about, ensuring that players, media management and understanding the way to speak to media. There was a response to that. And so that's where Ja Morant, understanding that this is a multi-billion-dollar business, you have to be careful. You have to be smart. In a league that's historically been image conscious. And that's the unfortunate aspect of this Ja Morant incident.
There's one thing I've had some sort of issue with is the way they've protected the small market teams and then the way they've hit the hammer on teams like New York, I mean, I don't think there should have been any sanction on the New York Jalen Brunson thing. I mean, his father basically, is close with the organization. What are you going to do? Like, teams agree to deals before the free agent date. Also, what else? Dallas Mavericks blatantly tank. What did they get? Just a fine. But then, they look at these small market teams. I mean, the Knicks have not moved up in the draft for like how long has it been since Patrick Ewing? Like, that can't be no coincidence. Like, it's been something like 20 something tries. And then you see, like, there was a year Cleveland moved up. Was it like 3 times in a year when they had LeBron? But yeah, you made a great question about Paul George. I don't really see that likely, that everyone that sort of wants to know my thoughts. I think there will continue discussions, but Leon Rose seems to be very, very patient in terms of which picks, and going all in for that next guy, knowing that we are a second round of the playoffs kind of team. And the next move has got to be something that gets you further. It can't set you back. Otherwise, that could be his job on the line. That's what fans need to understand. Like, he's safer sitting pat and waiting for the best move. Now, did you hear the reports? Kyle Kuzma is asking for 30 million, and is he a guy who would improve the team? But do you think he would get us to where we need to go?
It's funny. I was reading that report too. 30 million. I mean, Kyle Kuzma is a nice player. I'm not a $30 million player on my team. The issue is, and this is what's fascinating, is that if you're anywhere on the Knicks internet spaces, it's fascinating to see how much passion we have. The issue, though, is that every player, we're in a weird position. I forget who said this. It was one of the people we've interviewed. But the difference between becoming a bad team to a good team is easier than becoming a good team to a great team. I forget who it was. Chat, help me out. We're a good team phase. And so the next move is a difficult move. And so this is why you're seeing a portion of the Knicks fan base where we're hemming and hawing, because we're not sure what the perfect next move is, because all of us love the Knicks. If we're on this space right now, if you're in the chat, if you're a person like myself or CT, you want the Knicks to do incredibly well. The issue, though, and this is really why people get paid millions of dollars to make these decisions, is who is the best player to bridge that chasm, to bridge that gap between us being a good team into becoming a great team. And almost every player that we can think of right now that's been available via the press that we know about, whether it's Zion, whether it's Donovan, whether it's Zach LaVine, whether it's PG, we could argue the flaws in their games theoretically outweigh the benefit that they might have for us as a team. So Kyle Kuzma, for example, Evan Best just put it, great shooter. Is he the kind of defender that Tibbs would want? Is he at the salary that we would want to play, or pay rather, for that kind of role he would likely play on the New York Knicks? And this is the dilemma. Like, anytime we offer a response or an opinion, trust me, CT is a very bright guy. I think I'm pretty bright. We understand that every player that's available comes with a flaw. And this is why this is so difficult, but it's also so compelling because of that.
Yeah, and we always say, like, dudes who pull the cart before the horse, they pick the player they want and they say, I want that guy. Well, sometimes it goes in reverse. Whatever transaction is easier to make for the organization. Let's say the organization, for example, wants Paul George more than LaVine or Cat. But let's say the Paul George trade is just way too difficult. They're asking for way too much. They're trying to fleece us. Then you might have to go to the second guy. Let's say Karl Anthony Towns. They might figure out that's not worth it. Then they might go down the order and find themselves, in a Kyle Kuzma situation. But yeah, I don't think he's a guy that's going to, get us to being in a championship contention. But is he going to help us? Absolutely. But you got to decide, $30 million, is that something that's going to hurt us in the future? I mentioned Donovan Mitchell in the future. We're seeing now EJ with the cap situation changing. Smart front offices are going to get their books aligned, with cost-friendly deals. We are in a really good situation now with Derrick Rose and Evan Fournier salary. Finally, those bad moves, or the moves that did not work out very well, are finally coming off the books. They're going to help us out. What are we going to do with that salary? We're going to pay Josh Hart some. What are your thoughts now, reflecting on getting Josh Hart for ultimately the 23rd pick, which was a player picked up by last night? A lot of fans were a fan of that prospect, but now we have Josh Hart, and it looks like we're going to try to re-sign him.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 2 points like I kind of want to get to. There's the Josh Hart one, and then there's also the continued conversation with regards to the right move. So let me do the right move one first too. If you're a Knicks fan, you remember the Carmelo Anthony trade. And the Carmelo Anthony trade in 2011, I believe it was February of 2011. I might be February of 2011. Let's remember, guys. Let's honestly remember how divisive of a trade that was. Immediately, many of us were excited because we got Carmelo. We got the guy. We got the guy that many of us YouTube sports shows, that all of us were salivating. We were calling WFAN, we were calling ESPN radio, because we were like, we finally got the guy. But then after we got the guy, we spent 3 to 4 seasons trying to figure out how are we going to complement the talent surrounding this all-world talent. And we struggled with that, with the exception of 1 or 2, a season and a half. And that's why many of us, in retrospect, we're now looking back at that trade and we're wondering, was that trade all that it was worth? Was it worth it? Because out of that trade, here's the great thing, you have a Jamal Murray that appears, and that's the long-term effects of these decisions. Sometimes we're looking at it in a bottle and not realizing that these decisions impact future decisions. So whether it's Chauncey Billups, whether it's signing Tyson Chandler, whether it's draft picks that people think, it's 7 years from now, we'll never have to worry about it. And then it becomes Jamal Murray, and everyone's looking like, hey, how can we get Jamal Murray? Well, you don't trade for Carmelo Anthony. Not that I'm saying I wouldn't have done it, but this is why this business is so fascinating and so compelling. And it's become more of a global business because we love the drama that's associated with the NBA. But really quickly to the Josh Hart deal. Even the Josh Hart deal is complicated because Josh Hart, you could argue, is really 2 first-round picks. But one that we needed to send Kevin Knox to get Cam Reddish.
Correct.
And the first-round pick that we had to send to get Josh Hart. And so this is where, again, making smart decisions where you retain your assets, it's complicated. We all fell in love with Josh Hart. He's that kind of player that you love, but don't forget the historical context. So should we resign him? Leon, if he's not an idiot, better resign him because those were 2 draft picks, not just 1. But at the same time, Josh Hart is a piece. He's not the piece.
Yeah, and I said this last night. You got to use him correctly. Like for example, he's ideally a good 20-minute guy, spark off the bench for a championship contender. You shouldn't be playing him 30 plus minutes, 35 minutes in a playoff game. To the detriment of your shooting as well. But yeah, I'm happy with the acquisition. In terms of the 23rd pick, Josh Hart is a better player right now for this team to help us win. Is it frustrating we needed to part with a couple of firsts? Absolutely. And I think moving ahead, we await to see what number he's signed with. I'm sort of thinking it could be like a lower number, and then it could increase to help us out with money now, or it could be in reverse. It could be an $18 million deal. Everyone sort of cringes a little bit, and then it goes down to 17, 16, 15. With CAA, you just never know. He might give us a little bit of a discount. But there was a lot of CAA conversations, EJ. That's why I'm not surprised they're talking to Paul George, players that are easier to acquire that may re-sign with the Knicks, going to get them paid. Jacob Toppin, we talked about it tonight with MARC BERMAN. I guess I want to ask you what stood out the most out of what Mark said tonight. I'll sort of highlight the Gerson Rosas thing, saying that he's been basically the GM for over a year now. Some fans don't even realize. They're still asking me, who's our GM? It's like he was the guy that was already negotiating Donovan Mitchell, and Scott Perry's role was already reduced.
Yeah, that was an interesting comment by Mark, because I remember one of the first shows I ever did on Knicks Buzz. One of the questions I asked Mark was about the cohesion in the front office. And that became a major talking point 2 seasons ago, is how cohesive was the front office. Because if we remember back a year and a half ago, there was a lot of front office infighting that became really transparent. And it really raised the question of, were the Knicks a competent organization? And I forget who said let's stop talking about the history. Well, that's important, guys, because certain players will go to certain organizations based upon the history of the organization. For example, aside from the weather, one of the reasons why players love going to LA is because LA has a history of winning championships. Miami, which is a relatively new organization, its history is littered with championships. Its history is littered with people who have done a job commensurate with the best GMs and executives in basketball. So this is where, again, the Knicks get themselves into trouble, because the front office is one of those places where really the better you are in terms of articulating and delineating who does what, the better it will emerge on the floor, in the coaching box, and other elements of your organization. And so this is where it's like, I don't know. It's kind of concerning, because I thought we were taking a step forward, but that lack of transparency again is concerning.
Yeah, I'm kind of still feeling like this World Wide West conflict in the front office with differing opinions is still hurting the team in some regards. We know Leon Rose you're listening to so many different voices, but if Tom Thibodeau's his coach, he's kind of like Rafael Barlow, friend of the show, said, you've got to surround with Tibbs guys. That's just because you're paying a guy with a certain vision, and if you're acquiring players like Toppin and his brother, who may not be utilized, Cam Reddish, to their strengths, then it's kind of counterproductive. But at least the Josh Hart move was fully Tibbs aligned. Maybe to the fans that don't want Karl Anthony Towns, that could be music to their ears, because he doesn't really seem to be a Tom Thibodeau kind of guy. Mitchell Robinson is. Mark was telling me in another conversation, EJ, that Tibbs isn't the biggest fan of RJ Barrett. He's kind of okay with Randall, but he feels like he could have been more selfless as well. But he's not a fan of Obi. We know that in terms of his game as well. So with that said, what's an ideal off season for you now with these guys available? Evan Fournier, Rose coming off the books. Khris Middleton opted out, so he's an unrestricted free agent. There's obviously any other trade candidate. What takes your fancy right now?
Whew, that's such a difficult question. By the way, we knew that Tibbs wasn't a big fan of Obi. Someone found this on Nick's Twitter sphere. Derek Rose being asked the question, who was Tom Thibodeau's favorite player? And Derek Rose responding, not Obi. I don't know if there've been more prophetic words spoken.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah, I think it was like two seasons ago. But I guess my ideal off season is first and foremost, let's get the front office aligned. There are too many instances where we're hearing stories about front office drama or allusions to front office drama that we shouldn't be hearing. The division between World Wide West, Gerson Rosas, there are too many leagues. That's good organizations don't do that. That's the first thing, is stop with the whole, different camps. Why? So that would be an ideal offseason for me would start there, is getting a front office where roles are clear, rules are in place where, you're not allowed to leak to Shams. You're not allowed to leak to Woj. Because who had any inkling that Golden State, whether you agree with the move or not, that Golden State was involved with getting CP3? And Mike Dunleavy's been on the job for what, 17 minutes?
Yeah, that was nuts. But they're trying to maximize something. I knew they wanted to get out of Jordan Poole because of the teams just don't want to pay that luxury tax. Joe Lacob apparently put his foot down and he's like, I'm not paying this anymore.
Yeah, no, but that's the sign of a healthy organization. And what I'm talking about is organizational health. Will the move pay out? Who knows? Because we don't know if the championship window has closed on Golden State. But it's clear that that's an organization that has it together. You didn't hear about the deal until it happened, and everyone was in shock, caught off guard. What we tend to hear in terms of our front office, we hear, why do we know World Wide West's name? Why do we hear it in the news so often? That's a sign of some level of dysfunction, which I thought we were over that. So that would be goal number one this summer, is I hope they go on a Knicks retreat. They sing Kumbaya. They go to Westchester or wherever they need to go, then go wherever, Bahamas, and they just get along so that we can have a clear organizational vision.
I think
second thing, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I'll add to, the reason I feel World Wide West's role is so prominent is because we really didn't have a really strong GM presence. Like we talked about Scott Perry. Technically, the most trusted man in the room for Leon Rose is World Wide West. He's a big reason for his success in the agent world. He trusts him probably more than he trusts anyone. So if you're handing out sort of fake roles, he's technically kind of one of the general managers, maybe multiple general managers we have. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's part of the issue is that, unless you clearly delineate who does what, and please don't go beyond these boundaries, we get these leaks. In terms of, because no one really cares about this, they really care more about the players. In terms of a player or two, the one that I've been saying for about a year, and for the first time we've heard inklings that some teams were making moves or overtures to try to see how available this player was Brandon Ingram. Now I know he's not attainable. Please, before we start to write comments,
he might be.
But that's the other thing too, is that I think like a lot of these conversations are predicated upon what happens to other teams. Who would have thought all of this drama that's happening in New Orleans could have a role in terms of making certain players available that we had never thought before. But if you can get a certified small forward, if you're going to keep Julius, then I'd be a happy camper. But again, other than that, I do foresee that the Knicks are going to try to make a big move, but they can easily convince themselves that all of the players that they can possibly get are flawed in such a nature where they can kind of convince themselves they shouldn't make the deal.
Yeah. What I'm reading is it's not just necessarily short term, but some of our beloved players, RJ, Randall, there may not be in Leon's long-term plans from just various conversations I'm having now. Right now, they're a big part of our plans, but our championship window. I think I said this last night, man. If you had to pick a year, that's the earliest realistic year we could be a title contender. I put it at the earliest, which is a 26-27 season. I mean, realistically, what would you feel? I think that's what probably 3 seasons from now.
Yeah,
I mean,
think
obviously it could change with one transaction. It could completely change, but yeah.
No, I think that's a reasonable assertion. I mean, you have to look at Milwaukee and Philadelphia. What takes place at those two teams, because they're at the top of the conference, and then obviously now with Boston having made the deal that they made, what have they potentially extended their window? Because in all likelihood they're going to resign Jalen Brown now if you're going to make this deal. Possibly, who knows? But I think with Giannis and Embiid, I think Philadelphia probably goes first. And so if the Knicks continue their upward trajectory, you're talking about 4. What happens with Cleveland? Do they implode again, as Mark alluded to? So it is conceivable that you're really talking about 2 to 3 years in terms of serious championship consideration. And it has to first go with Philadelphia and Cleveland crashing and burning. And then we haven't even discussed Miami. And that's the crazy thing, is because, this time last year, many of us had written off Miami, like myself included. And they just seem to figure it out they seem to figure it out very often.
Yeah, I've kind of trying to figure out Miami, and I feel like they've got more two-way players. They're not necessarily elite at what they do, but the sum of their parts, like if you culminate 7 to 8 two-way players, they can all contribute to winning, even if a few go down. But in terms of the two guard spot, like, a lot of fans want to keep RJ, Randall. They're happy with what they're doing. For me, it's a big year for Quentin Grimes, EJ. I'll tell you why. He was untouchable in a Donovan Mitchell deal, and it's time he becomes more consistent for us to take that next step. Let's say we don't make any moves and we're ready to get closer to competing, right? We need an elite two guard, and I'm looking at like a 15 to 17 point per game kind of production from Quentin Grimes needed to get to that level in his 3rd year. Because that could be a spot where we could easily keep RJ, keep Randall, keep Mitch, keep Brunson, and sign an elite two guard. Let's say in 2 years, fantasy world, Devin Booker slots into that shooting guard spot. We're a contender instantly. So does Quentin Grimes hold the key or the shooting guard spot if we're keeping everyone else? Hypothetical. We could sign one elite two guard. Maybe it is Zach LaVine, for those that want Zach LaVine. That could be something enough to push us to NBA Finals realm.
I think you're right. But I would add one more player, Emmanuel Quickley.
Yeah.
As Emmanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes develop, we'll have a better understanding of what the Knicks could be, not for next season, but for to actually be a legitimate championship contender. Because you need those players that are still early in their contract or second contract situation to evaluate what pieces, because other teams are going to want your players. And part of the issue that we had this time last year is that Emmanuel Quickley did not have the value that he has today. And that's going to be important, because at some point we're going to have to fold contracts to make a big move. At some point that has to happen. But the issue is, what are the values of the young pieces that you'd be moving? The more valuable a piece is, the less you're going to have to pay in terms of other capital. It's the reason why like people are talking about Dame Lillard to Miami and they're talking about Tyler Hero. And you're trying to figure out like what are the pieces that Miami has to make that kind of deal. It's well because they have the ability to raise the capital value of their young pieces so that they're enticing for a Portland or for another organization to say, you know what? Yeah, I won't take as many draft picks that may not be valuable when they're coming from you, but I'll take this young piece. And so to me, that might be the objective for next season. Increase the performance and productivity, and as a result, the value of Quentin Grimes and Emmanuel Quickley.
Yeah, I love what you just said, man. That could be the key where, you know, players like Hero you mentioned was actually a six man of the year, so he really deserved that value he has because he's proven that. But Emmanuel Quickley put together with Quentin Grimes could put an enticing package together for the New York Knicks to get that next stud. And those were two picks drafted late in the first round. And given the fact that they are still really, really young and enticing for players, let's say it quickly continues to grow and take that next level, worthy of a six man of the year, and he actually wins it. And then let's say Quentin Grimes, you know, increases his averages, scoring average of 5 to 6 more points, shooting percentage gets up to 39%. Then suddenly we're cooking on a huge package to get that two guard spot. And I like what you mentioned with Giannis, with Embiid. We're closer than we've ever been in the last like 25 years because there's only a handful of teams better than us, maybe an injury away. I think Philly's really, really in flux. Like I think even if we didn't make any move, Philly could get worse if they lose James Harden. Shake Milton's a free agent also. So for everyone that sort of might be upset if the Knicks stay pat, well, there are teams in the East that might get worse, and I think we could still be the third or the fourth seed with a good consistent run. What are your thoughts?
No, I totally agree. I think that's like the point of the night. Like Philadelphia might be the Brooklyn of the 2023-2024 season, where it just doesn't come together. You have players who, you know, James Harden is someone with a personality and a voice. Joel Embiid has personality and voice. They let their thoughts be known. But they're also in a weird position where you have to wonder the extent to which they can improve that roster. They're not in the same exact place that the Knicks are. Philadelphia is in this weird place of having two all-world players, but they're trying to figure out how do we get the complementary pieces to fit around these two core players. And actually, I shouldn't even be talking this way. Maybe one player, because we don't know what James Harden is going to be doing. So it is conceivable that next year, where Philadelphia was 2023, they're not in the same place. So that's what's so amazing about this league is that teams are changing positions. And so where we're going to be is relative to where, and yes, Gerard B., that was the next thing I was about to say. Orlando is one of those teams to keep an eye out on. Yeah, so like the league is in flux. The conference is in flux. It's constantly in flux. And, you know, this is why this offseason is going to be so critically important. And I pray and I hope that Grimes is in the lab working. I'm hoping that IQ is in the lab working because this will be a major offseason and a major crossroads of a season this year coming.
Yeah, I see us really getting better internally. Like, I want to point out, EJ, you might know, FIBA's coming up, and our own Jalen Brunson, point guard of the Team USA, and now RJ Barrett, hopefully a big fixture in Canada's games. You know, he'll probably start. Although Canada's pretty good now, man. They got Jamal Murray and Shai Gilgeous, so maybe RJ Barrett's not even a starter on Canada anymore. Maybe he's the wing, but then there's Lou Dort, isn't there? I don't know.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see like FIBA basketball this season because it's really going to be a measure of. You saw Will's comment. Will's comment was hilarious. It's going to be a measure of growth. Like really, like this is going to be an opportunity to see how much younger players are going to grow. And here's the other thing too. Let's not forget, Jalen Brunson might take another level, like might hit another level this upcoming
Not
season.
might, should.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that to me, in as much as we're concerned about who are we going to get, let's not forget the importance of internal improvement.
Yeah, it's a big year. And when Melo played in FIBA, he came back a bit an even bigger beast. So yeah, Jalen Brunson feeling confident. And let's not forget, in 1 or 2 years, he's looking at that like, I'm underpaid now. Like, I want to continue this level of play, go to the next level, get the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals, and then I want to get $250 million now. You've seen some of these dudes get these contracts. Jalen Brunson is absolutely worth the supermax.
Yeah.
With FIBA, what did you think of the big transaction with KP, formerly our guy? That that rekindle that reunion is not to be.
I know that I was trying to make sense of a lot of Knicks fans. They're being enamored with KP. And the best I can come up with is that, we've all been in relationships, and, so that person, that girl breaks your heart, and you're like, you're in your bathroom, you're in your living room, and you're singing Usher love songs, you're just mad because you're like, how could you leave me? You're watching movies, you're crying, and then all of a sudden you get word from a friend that she asks, how are you doing? And that's kind of what it felt like with KP. That there was a video that came out last year, the interview where he was talking about and waxing romantically about how things didn't play out the way that he wanted it to with Knicks, and it was like, dude, that's part of the game in terms of playing in New York City, is knowing how to manage media, knowing how to manage your relationships with the front office. Not to excuse the front office that was present there at that time, because Phil Jackson was a disaster. But we can't forget what transpired in terms of that relationship. And also, he tends to be an unhealthy player. It's kind of funny because Danilo Gallinari was in that trade, and Gallo, he didn't have the political issues like that tended to mire KP's relationship with the Knicks. But he's just one of those players where you just like you're constantly wishing that he were healthier. So I'm glad that the Knicks steered clear of that, even though many of us romanticize that ex. But guys, it's never a good move to get back with the ex. That's another show. But yeah.
I want to take this opportunity to also throw some love back to Mitchell Robinson again. I've been, critical at times about his fit and us needing to get more versatile, and that's still true for me. But I think we're going to start to see more people appreciate Mitch even more for the contract, also the production. Let's not forget, he helped us win a playoff round against Cleveland. He's one of the reasons why Jarrett Allen he put him all the way on the trade block for Cleveland. Now, Mitchell Robinson's earning 15 milli, and it's descending, I think.
Yeah.
So fans won't really start to really feel a certain way about a player until he's on their team earning 30 mil. And then the production, the inconsistency, the injuries might start creeping in. So let's appreciate Mitch more he stayed healthy this year. He was productive, probably had his best year as a pro. In a world now where the cap's changing and all of that, 15 milli, and I don't know, what has he got, 2 more years on that deal? Was this the second year of a 4-year deal, or does he have a player option? I'll look that up in a minute, but what are your thoughts?
No, I think Mitch is Mitch. Mitch is exactly who we thought he was. He's someone that when I made the comment earlier with regards to flawed trade targets or free agent targets, flawed trade and free agent targets, someone replied and said, well, all players are flawed. Yes, but some players are more flawed than others. Mitch is our guy. Mitch is we love Mitch. He has his nickname. But the issue is that some of Mitch's flaws hinder or are really visible consistently on the team. Like, love Mitch, love his swag, love what he offers. He offers something that's incredibly unique for this roster. He does something that there isn't another player able to replicate what he does for our team. The issue is, though, is when it comes on the offensive end. Well, on the offensive end, for a team that really we saw the offensive stall out against Miami, one of the reasons why is because we often are playing 4-on-5 on the offensive end with Mitch. And
Yeah.
I don't know what we do to remedy that. So to the person who actually asked me earlier, what do I think about the Knicks ISO offense? I'm not a fan of it. I mean, to me, the best basketball would go and harken back to mid 2010s Golden State basketball, where people are moving and cutting. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful form of basketball. As Clyde loves to say, the basketball is faster than the man. And when the basketball is moving, it is faster than a player can get to. The issue is, though, is that when we have certain pieces that don't fit well with that kind of offense, you're kind of stuck. And Mitch is one of those pieces.
Yeah, definitely. It's an area we could definitely upgrade, but then you got to get that guy. Like if you're going to pay 30 mil, he must be a way better option than Mitch. And I put Mitch's contract on the chat. I can confirm he's only on this first year of a 4-year deal. There's 3 more years to run with no options, so all 3 more years are guaranteed. But get this, it goes from 15 mil to 14, then down to 12 for the final year. That's an extraordinary contract, really. That's just going to grow in more value. Could you imagine if he's in all defensive team in that 4th year earning $12 million? That's going to be a huge chip. Yeah, for us. But yeah, I want to give you the floor, man. There's been a lot happen. Is there anything you would want to address with what's happened so far and what's to come?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a minute since I've been on Knicks Buzz, probably close to a month. Yeah, CT, there was no falling out, so there's no drama ever. CT's my boy. Yeah, so I have missed a lot of like the NBA headlines, and there's nothing that really sticks out right now. I think that what's really going to be fascinating, aside from the Ja Morant situation, and that's the other thing I think that we have to keep in mind, and we always try to stress this, is that the Knicks are 1 of 30. So because they're 1 of 30, some of the decisions, some of the way we evaluate our team is with respect to other teams and what's happening with them. So for example, is it conceivable that Zion Williamson is available? This time last year, we weren't discussing that. That was a pipe dream. That was something that fans were talking about because of the Duke connection between RJ and Cam and Zion. But the league doesn't stop. And the drama that's ensued with Zion personally, that's now made the Pelicans have to consider certain things, particularly with the luxury tax threshold. What happens with Golden State? For the first time with this new CBA, it seems as if Golden State is going to have to make some very hard decisions. And so some of these other teams, their storylines will intersect with our own. And it's going to have a bearing on what happens. So, some of the teams I really want to watch to see what happens with them this offseason include places like Chicago. I think Chicago will have a bearing on what takes place with the league. Obviously, what happens with Portland, with the Dame Lillard situation. It almost seems as if like someone has to make a decision in terms of whether or not Dame is going to be a Portland Trailblazer for this coming season. And what's the relationship with Miami? And then last but not least, the other team that we talked about this actually with David Aldridge, Washington. So what does happen with Kyle Kuzma? I think that's a player for us to keep a look at, to keep an eye on in terms of, is that a realistic yet? Not saying that I want Kyle Kuzma, but that's a piece that once Washington has already decided that it's going to blow up its team, that's a piece that, again, I don't foresee Washington committing a hefty salary to a Kyle Kuzma when they've now embarked upon the OKC route.
Yeah. most def. And yeah, you would have seen he opted out, so he's completely free to choose his destination. And I'll just follow up with that on my thoughts on Kuz. I feel like we're going to hear the Knicks. We're going to hear reports of the Knicks linked to Kuz 100% for many reasons. Why I'll explain why. He's CAA, so at the very least, it'll help drive up his value to help his agent get that 30 million from whoever team, even if it's not the Knicks. But if there's reports that the Knicks are considering it, it's going to help his value. So his CAA, never forget that. We're going to hear reports the Knicks and Kuzma linked. Secondly, is that he's obviously free to go where he wants to, and I do think that the fact is we've heard reports in the past that the Knicks have there's fans in the Knicks front office of Kyle Kuzma as well, and the fact that we can assign a player and not give up anything, even if you don't like the 30 mil, he could be tradable in the future. So that's not that the 30 mil is the new 20 mil. Remember when the max was 20, when Amari used to be $100 million player over 5 years?
Five for 100. Yeah,
Well, now
inflation, man.
Yeah, the 40 is going to be the new 30, and then the 50 is going to be the new 40. So for Kyle Kuzma, he had a great year, and in this market, 30 mil, if he's the second or third option on a team, or maybe not second option, that's a bit crazy, but it is slightly overpaid. I'm not going to disagree. But again, if he's the perfect fit and he can help us take us to that next level, the thing is, EJ, I really feel like the Knicks need length. They need the extra shooting and they need some length. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Kuz. I think we're going to hear reports because he's CAA. I think we're going to continue to hear the Paul George thing. I think there is real consideration in Cliptown about breaking those two up and just seeing what they can get, because they're one injury away from never getting the same value ever again. Do you think?
Oh no, I mean I 100% agree with you. I think that what seems to be happening when the Knicks front office is functional, when they're having a good day, it seems as if they're able to have a moment where they reflect and say, okay, this name fits whatever we want. CAA, a star, moves us forward in terms of the trajectory of being a viable contender in the Eastern Conference. But what seems to be happening, and let's applaud them for this, is they have moments where they discuss certain players and they say, well, let's wait and stop here for a second. We're concerned about X, Y, and Z. Again, this is why I keep on going back to like the Knicks, for example, when they are making moves in the offseason, they tend to make one or two. They're not one of these Isaiah Thomas or Phil Jackson, impetuous, we're going to make a rash decision immediately. So that's why Kyle Kuzma, he seems to, if Brandon Ingram isn't a get, he seems to be the next favorable option that of players we know that are available, because there are always players that are available. We just don't know that. And here's the other thing too. If it were a decision between Kyle Kuzma and Paul George, I would go with Kuzma, because he seems to be a contract that if we needed to move again, you could possibly get more value for it, as opposed to a Paul George who's near the end of a contract. It might be harder to trade that 33-year-old injury prone, his history of injury contract to get equal or close to equal value for what you traded, as opposed to a Kyle Kuzma.
And that's exactly what the Clippers know, and they're understanding now. Even if they produce great in the playoffs, a Kawhi, Paul George in the regular season, if neither of them can play 65 games, the West is so loaded, you're going to end up in the 6th seed, the 7th seed, and then you've got to ask yourself, no matter how good we are, can we make our way to the Western Conference Finals from that position? So that's why I think they're looking at the Paul George, shaking that up. I'm torn in terms of a Paul George Kuzma, because Paul George would help more in the short term, but it would be a hard 2-year timeline. Like, guys, we got to win it right now, and that's a dangerous situation to be in.
Absolutely.
I want to throw a third name at you in the chat, Khris Middleton. If you had to choose who's a $40 million dude who's won a championship before, could be that real two secondary option that the Knicks need. Out of those three, would Khris Middleton be ahead of any of those two?
I would put Khris Middleton. Actually, it was funny. Before I came on the show today, I was thinking about Khris Middleton. I would put a Khris Middleton before a PG, even though PG is the better and more preeminent player. The issue with Khris Middleton, as we discussed, in the offseason show before this last season that just happened, we discussed that there was going to be a point during the season where we knew Khris Middleton was going to be injured. And guess what? He was injured. And that's just the nature of where we are in the league. There are just certain players who are going to have a stretch of time where they're unavailable. The issue with the Khris Middleton, I think Khris Middleton is a guy you pick up when you're in championship contender mode.
Facts.
And you can find a way to convince yourself you're in championship contender mode. Paul George is similar. Like when definitively, I can argue without a shadow of a doubt that I'm going to be in the Eastern Conference Finals or the Western Conference Finals. The Knicks can't make that argument quite yet. So that's why I think a Kuzma makes more logical sense. Not to say that I want it to happen, but it makes more sense.
Yeah, he actually fits with this core of RJ and Randall more because they like to dominate the ball. I don't know if Kuzma's a dude who really dominates the ball a lot. He does make quick decisions. He catches and drives immediately. He can spot up and shoot. He's so rangy. He can just basically catch it and rise up. So I think his game complements as PG's does. I think Khris Middleton does a lot of more dribbling, posting up, dominating the ball. So I don't know if he's going to fit as well with Brunson and Randall. I'm more for an overhaul. Like if you are moving on from Randall and you're clearing up two spots, then all things are on the table. I just don't know if Leon Rose can concoct a deal of that magnitude yet. I think we're going to have Randall for another year or two. Now I got to ask you for your prediction in terms of like what do we see in the coming week? Like do they bring in a new starting player? Even if you just want to put percentages like on it, because I just don't think this front office is as married to RJ, but I think they were still okay keeping him and waiting for that right move because let's not forget they didn't draft him. He's not CAA, and also he was in the Donovan Mitchell deal, so they've put him in that package already.
I do think that RJ is the guy that could be moved. I think that Julius Randle is a player that could be moved as well. I think it's more likely that an RJ could be moved. The issue is that we've not seen from this organization the propensity to want to make big deals yet. And I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying that the pattern has not been we're going to swing for the fences as of yet. And I think for them to want to trade Julius, they're going to have to want to make that big, huge, colossal deal. So if that huge, colossal deal isn't available, I don't foresee Julius being moved. I think there's a possibility he could be moved, but I don't think that they're proactively seeking to move him. Whereas with RJ, I think that there are a number of different deals where they could convince themselves it's worthwhile to trade RJ. I think there are more scenarios where they could foresee trading RJ than they could foresee trading Julius.
Yeah, and I think, RJ's obviously playoff performance would have, reinforced some things with the front office. Like he is a player of the future that they can keep. And I don't think it's like they just really don't like RJ. I just think, we know our starting unit. If you want to bring in one more starting player, it's either probably going to be Mitch at the center spot or RJ. Randall's more difficult to move. I think if they could have had their choice to move anyone, maybe Randall would be the top guy. But let's not forget he's managed by Aaron Mintz. And like I mentioned again, RJ Barrett is not repped by anybody in CAA right now. Randall plays hurt. Thibodeau loves that. They respect that. Yes, there's some rough edges, with the outbursts and all of that. But if he's bringing you all-star, he's bringing you all NBA, he's playing on a value contract, he's managed by one of Leon Rose's friends and CAA Aaron Mintz, there's more reasons to keep him on the Knicks and hope that the next CAA guy can come. But yeah, I don't see a Zach LaVine move coming. I never saw it coming, to be honest with you. I sort of felt that Klutch thing in the background was one reason, but I think Thibodeau being here is another reason, the injury concerns. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they value more, whether it is Kuzma, Middleton. I really think Paul George is probably at the top. There's a reason we're hearing Ian Begley and more confirmed reports about discussions with the LA Clippers now. I think Leon Rose, that could be his big swing. That could be something where he really means business. He's prepared to throw out 3 first-round picks. Let's not forget Washington pick is going to be useless now. They're going to be bad for the next 3 years, so that pick may not convey. We still have Milwaukee's pick, which is going to be in the 20s somewhere. The Detroit pick may not convey for another year or two, and then we've got all of our own. So some of these protected picks, EJ, don't mean a lot. So could they package all 3 of them and a couple of our own, and then some of these other pieces? I could see it happening for Paul George. I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a world where it could happen. The issue is that there's a lot we don't know about Leon Rose. He's one of these more enigmatic front office kinds of people, especially in New York sports. In New York sports, you have certain general managers or leaders of organizations who tend to be more vocal, and so you can get to figure out, oh, this is this person's personality trait. This is how they tend to operate when they're negotiating deals. So a lot of people know that I'm a New York Yankees fan. Brian Cashman, for example, speaks to the press regularly, and while he's a master of deflecting, you get a general insight as to how he operates. And there's also a larger body of work. Like he's been with the New York Yankees for more than 20 years. Unfortunately, with the New York Knicks, they're a more clandestine, quieter organization that doesn't offer a lot of transparency. And there isn't that large of a body of work by which we can understand Leon Rose when he doesn't speak. So one of the things that we're trying to really get into his brain is understanding, is Leon Rose a big game, big trade kind of GM or president of basketball operations? Or is he someone who is satisfied with singles and doubles until something is perfect? Because the other thing is too, guys, for every GM we've had issues with, whether it were Donnie Walsh, whether it was, Scott Perry, whether it was Phil Jackson, whether it was Isaiah Thomas, we can go down the list. Scott Layden going back to the 90s. At some point, they were willing to make a deal that was going to divide the Knicks fan base, and they did not necessarily care about the fan reaction. They knew that it was coming with the territory. We've not really seen that kind of chutzpah with Leon Rose yet, so it's hard to measure what he's going to do. He's a real mystery.
He is, but I think he knows the clock's kind of ticking. And remember, Worldwide West is his big trusted confidant, big CAA guy. That's why I'm here. That's why we're hearing all these Paul George things. And I've seen some fans make a great point about Paul George health concerns. And if you're having Randall and you're having Brunson to help you win regular season games, you could keep Paul George more healthier, maybe for the playoffs. Run him 31 minutes, 32 minutes a night. To try to keep him more healthy. And he's 33, but if Paul George is healthier, his play in his archetype, if he's productive for the next 3-4 years, he'll be 36, but his kind of play is still helpful. He can spot up, he can shoot, he can post up. His game is really exactly what we need. It's a matured Brandon Ingram, It's just a few years maybe too late, but
that's the issue. Yeah. It's a few years. I mean, look, guys, let's not forget, Paul George's basketball timeline intersects with peak Carmelo's timeline. Let's not forget that. Paul George, we were first introduced to Paul George when he was playing with the Indiana Pacers. And that isn't something we should forget. Like, that's the issue, is that does his time, I stole the words right out of my mouth. Does his timeline match, ideally, the timeline of a Julius and a Jalen Brunson? And back to something you said before, really quickly.
Yeah.
The other tricky thing about Julius too is that all of a sudden, before our own eyes, Julius he seems to have a lot more respect in the league than before we got him. He seems to like have ascended in terms of the brotherhood and the hierarchy of the NBA. He seems to be more of a respected player because, in part, the league is changing. The timeline is changing. Carmelo's retired. Chris Paul is in this last phases of his career. Believe it or not, LeBron seems to be in the last phase of his career. So there's a turning of the guard. And so what also makes it tricky is that there are political ramifications for how you deal with a Julius Randle that would have reverberations around the league and color the perception that players have of all sorts, any tier. It would color how they perceive the New York Knicks and their willingness to play with the New York Knicks and play in the New York media market, which is demanding because there are like 77 different channels like this, but that's part of the makeup of playing for the New York Knicks.
Yeah, indeed. And I know how big you are on asset management. So before we wrap up, we've got to talk a bit more about the fringe moves that we might see coming. Now, Jacob Toppin, Obi's brother, drafted now. Now, I've been saying this recently. I really feel like if the value for Obi is not what they like, they're going to keep Obi for another year. Because, like Mark even said, why trade him in a one-on-one package like Obi for 2 second rounders? Or that the fan base is going to be up in arms. So they either save Obi for that bigger blockbuster, or why not just run him back into his final year, but into restricted free agency? He helps us. He's a rotation piece. He shoots. Why trade him away for nothing? What are your thoughts on what we'll see with Obi?
Oh, well, my philosophy on this. I do not like when organizations trade depressed assets. That's a lesson we should have learned with Cam Reddish. Cam Reddish was the quintessential example of what happens when you have a depressed asset and you end up having to attach other assets to save face. It's also a Julius conundrum. Like if we had, and I'm not saying I want to, but theoretically, if we wanted to trade Julius, the moment you do that is before the trade deadline, not after now a playoff run where he kind of reverted back to, is Julius a playoff player? You do it at the height of his value. And so the same situation is now happening with Obi, is that do you use this as an offseason to trade him? No, because you're going to be trading a number 8 pick, a former number 8 pick for pennies on the dollar. And that's not smart asset management. It's not smart in terms of growing the team and really placing yourself to have the ability to make moves 2 or 3 or 4 moves down the line. So you know how I feel about it. I believe in growing assets.
Yeah. I want to sort of address what Obi could be feeling too, because it seems like fans sort of forget that too. Like Obi loves being in New York. Like it's his hometown. He was drafted by the New York Knicks, his hometown team. He's got fam here. Now he's got twice the fam here in the organization. But there's the CAA issue too, where they would want him to get paid. They would want him in a situation where he can get a good second contract. So that's going to be tricky. If I had to guess, I still probably lean towards he's going to get traded if there's a deal they like, but that's not going to be easy either. So maybe they run it into the deadline and keep him, because like I said, World Wide West, it just continues to bang his fist on the table saying just keep Obi now. Now we doubled up and signed his bro, man. Like if that isn't an indication that Obi's staying, then I'll be surprised.
Yeah, and it's just not good business to trade a depressed asset. There are certain players, like the superstar is the player that you trade during the offseason. A number 7 rotation guy, which ostensibly that's what Obi is, number 7 and number 8, probably number 8 at this point because he's behind Emmanuel Quickly, behind Josh Hart. he's your number 8 and possibly your number 9, behind Hartenstein. You don't compound the folly of the draft pick by trading away the draft pick when it's devalued. You try your best to trade that kind of asset mid-season.
Yeah, most def. And as we wrap this thing up, obviously we wait to see what happens with Quickly, but I think he's being saved for that bigger deal as well. I think we're going to keep Quickly into the season at least. We know how important he is for Brunson's health to back him up as well. But yeah, we wait to see that blockbuster deal. If the Paul George thing goes ahead, I think Quickly's in the deal. Do you agree? Like Quickly, Obi, probably RJ.
Oh yeah, no. Steve Ballmer is going to. I mean, because again, like you have to make sure, you have to ensure, if you're Steve Ballmer for the LA Clippers fans, as you're going into that new arena in Inglewood, you want to ensure that you have things that your fans can be excited about. And unfortunately, Emmanuel Quickly for us, which is fortunate and unfortunate at the same time, was a runner-up for Sixth Man of the Year. So when Steve Ballmer and his team, they're running over the Knicks assets, the first piece that they're going to talk about is Emmanuel Quickly, because you need to be able to convince your fan base and especially to pay for a new arena. These arenas are not cheap in places like LA and New York City, very expensive. So the first place they're going to go is Emmanuel Quickly.
And there's a former Knick on their team that was almost out the door, but talks that he might be wanting a new role is Mook Morris. I think maybe he could be part of that big shakeup. He's 17 million. He was really productive for us. But if we are getting Paul George, then I don't want to be paying him as a backup. But maybe if someone else is gone, we could do with both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really going to be. This offseason is really going to be something that reveals who Leon Rose is. For a person who does not speak, you can judge a person by their words, but you can also judge a person by their actions. And given that Leon Rose has systemically decided not to speak, this will be the offseason where we can measure what kind of basketball person he is in his actions. So we'll be watching.
We will. Yep. Summer League, also Jacob Toppin, and we signed Jalen Martin, who's a 6'6" prospect wing from Overtime Elite program. I'm going to watch some film, break it down. Might even get a scout from the Overtime Elite program to talk to him about it. He's got some supporters saying it was a really good steal for an undrafted player, but it remains to be seen if the Knicks can develop one of them. But yeah, it's been a great show. Appreciate the chat, rocking along. Replay gang, EJ, MARC BERMAN. We'll be talking soon, very soon. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, it's good to be back, and to everyone. Hope you guys have a great summer wherever you are. Much love to the Knicks Buzz chat. Like, subscribe. Please make sure to like, subscribe. Replay gang. Don't be cheap with the likes. Don't be cheap with the share. Share this content. Share this content with someone you love. Let them know this is one of the best places you can ever come to for intellectual, smart Knicks conversation. Shout out to my boy CT and to MARC BERMAN, the legend. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time, your retirement time. We really appreciate it. So much love to everyone. Thanks for holding us down.
Yep. Kick Rocks, Rich Paul as well. Klutch Sports. And peace everyone. See you on the next one.